Hey guys, welcome back to Sip and Dip with Chelsea. For today's video, I am going to be talking about dip powder dry time problems. I've been getting asked a lot recently about how do you know when the base liquid is dry? What do you do if you accidentally smudge your top coat? We're going to be talking about the different categories of dry times and maybe help you choose which liquid might be best for you. So to get started, I want to share what are some things that can affect the dip powder liquid dry times. Believe it or not, where you live can play a big role. So if you live in a colder area, that can make the liquid sometimes dry slower, and vice versa. If you live in a hotter area, it can make the liquids dry faster, especially if you have a vent right above you or a fan running near you, that may make it dry faster. Also, your application. If you apply the liquid thicker or you have a thicker consistency liquid, that can definitely make the liquid dry slower. For my peel-based girlies out there, the next layer that you put on, which is your base liquid, can make it go on uneven or even dry faster because of the peel base. So there are a lot of things out there that affect the liquid dry time that are out of our control. With so many different brands out there and all of these different dry times, how do you begin to choose? So first I want to talk about a faster drying liquid. These are just two brands that I know off of the top of my head that are a faster dry time, in my opinion, for where I live. And the reason you may want to choose a faster drying liquid could be for a straightforward or basic manicure. So think just building up an apex, just doing a solid color manicure. All of these things are great for a faster dry liquid. Another reason may be because you are a fast worker. So if you're used to just dipping really quick and you notice you get your manicures done really fast, then a fast dry liquid may be compatible for you. For those of us who work in tiny pockets of time, like stay-at-home moms or people who just don't have a whole lot of time to sit around and do their nails, fast dry liquids are great because when you are done with that top coat, they typically dry really quick. And of course, with the base liquid, it's drying fast, so you don't have to sit around and wait. Last but not least, this is great for professionals. I'm sure all of these other bullet points apply. You're doing basic manicures, you're a multitasker, you're working in small time slots, but that's not to say that DIYers can't enjoy these liquids. This is personally my favorite right now because I don't have a whole lot of time and I'm working faster. Next up is a medium dry time. So here are some brands that I feel fit into this category. Remember, this could vary for you depending on where you live. It's all going to vary on personal opinion on what you would consider fast, medium, or slow. So why might you want a medium dry time liquid? This is like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It's that perfect blend of both. So why might you want this? Because it's user friendly. This is great for professionals, but also great for beginners because you still have time to clean up, do designs, do anything you need to do without it drying too fast, but also you're not still just sitting around waiting an excessive amount of time. So like I said, it's great for basics and designs because you can still do both without rushing or feeling like you're just waiting around. I truly believe this dry time is perfect for anyone, but especially those experienced DIYers who want to start doing designs but don't want to sacrifice their time. Last but not least are slow dry liquids. So these two odorless ones that I have on hand are probably the slowest drying liquids that I have. There's also so many others out there. It doesn't have to be odorless necessarily. I find that a lot of small businesses go the slower dry time route because their customers are beginners. So when you're just starting out, you're still finding your rhythm. You're still trying to figure everything out. So you're moving slowly. You don't want that base liquid to dry before you can get the powder on. And of course, you want time to clean up if you need to. So a slow dry liquid is so beginner friendly and a really great starting point. It's also really great for design. So for French manicures, ombres, anything like that, where you find that you have to move quickly to get the powder on the nail before the base liquid dries, a slow dry liquid is perfect for that. To get started, I'm just fluffing up my powder with a toothpick, and I've got Kiara Sky's base liquid. I'm removing the excess liquid on my base liquid brush, and then we're gonna do a basic, straightforward, solid color nail. So I'm applying it across my entire nail and then dipping into the powder. You'll see I have a beautiful, even coverage because I'm moving quickly, making sure I get this powder on my nail before the base liquid dries, and we're gonna follow the same steps on my pinky. So we've got a beautiful even coverage on both of the nails. Now I want to show you with the same exact fast dry liquid, what happens when we do not remove the excess product. So we're going to apply all of this excess in a thicker way on the swatch stick. Watch what happens. It goes from a fast dry to a slow dry. Do you see this darker, wet, shiny spot on the swatch stick? That is because it is indeed still wet. So now it went from fast dry to slow dry. So how do we fix this? Personally, I like to just dip right back into the powder. It's going to absorb into this base liquid and help it dry properly. But this is why I stress so much about liquid control, because it really does play a big part in the liquids working properly. All right, now let's play with a slower drying liquid. I'm gonna do this the same application, a thin, even layer across my thumbnail, and then dipping into the powder. So after you dip, you may think this looks perfect, everything looks great, but I wanna zoom in here and show you this spot. This spot right here being a little bit darker and shiny tells me this spot is still wet. But instead of dipping back into the powder like I normally would, I wanna show you what happens if you don't. And of course, traditionally, you would probably go on to do your other hand, so more time is going to lapse instead of me, where I just dip my thumb and now I'm ready to dust it off. I know it can be incredibly frustrating when you just finished and you go to dust it off and all of a sudden it's coming off in clumps or completely just brushing off of the nail. So remember, I just did my thumb. I didn't go on to do any more nails. Watch over the dry patch, it's perfect, but right there where I pointed out that wet spot, it just brushes it right off. So let me show you how to fix it while it's still wet. So I'm going to use a fluffy brush to just remove any clumps that might still be on there, and I'm going to dip back into the powder. And while it's still wet with my glove, I'm going to just gently press it back down into place. There may never be a perfect amount of time for me to say, yes, it is dry by this point, because it can vary on where you live. Do you have fans running? How many nails did you do after the fact? But to just be safe, if you find you're running into this issue, I suggest using a fluffy brush in the meantime. Now let's continue on with another slow dry example on a second layer. So another thin, even coat across the entire nail and dipping into the powder. This time it's going to be a lot more visible that it is still wet. So look at how different this looks now. Do you see I've got a darker spot here and I've got a couple drier patches? When you see a darker, shinier spot, that is how you know it is still tacky and still wet. So you can absolutely move on to the other nails if you want, and it will eventually air dry. But I don't have the patience for that, so I personally like to just dip right back into the jar while I wait. So I'm gonna move on now, and look at that coverage. You can see such a difference in the coverage. That's how you know it is more absorbed into that liquid. This is why a slow dry formula can be so beginner friendly, because you do not have to rush. You can just clean up if you need to, which you'll see I do right here. I got a little bit on my skin and there's no rushing again. So it's great for designs, great for beginners. And remember, at this point, you would go on to do each of your other nails. So that is more time to lapse for it to dry. So for my thumb, I'm going to show you what happens when you don't immediately dip back into the powder. It may not be an immediate thing that you notice. So you'll see right after I dip, it looks beautiful. It's got a great coverage. It doesn't look too dark, but watch what happens after about 30 seconds. Do you see how it immediately got dark? That is how I know the liquid is still tacky and wet. So yes, you can let this air dry and move on, but I like to just dip right back in. It speeds up that dry time process, so I'm not waiting around. So now, just to be safe, I'm going to use a fluffy dusting brush. Now let's talk about glitter. So I personally would grab for a faster drying liquid, because I find that these glitter dip powder formulas are less acrylic powder and more of those glitter pieces, which seem to just dry slower naturally. So I don't find that I need anything but a fast dry liquid. If you find that you are struggling to keep it off of your skin, or getting them to lay flat, or rearranging them right on the nail, then maybe you would like a slower drying. But I really want to showcase all formulas today, so I'm going to use this medium dry time. In my opinion, again, remember, this is just my own personal preferences and opinions. I'm going to use this. So we're going to do a thin, even layer across the entire nail, and then keeping it straightforward, just dip into the powder. So now I'm just going to gently press everything down, rearrange it a little bit, make sure it's all laying flat and nothing is on my skin. Do you see how dark it looks now? That is because it is still tacky and still wet. So again, would I grab a fluffy or a stiff brush? If I fully let this dry, move on to do other nails, then yes, I would definitely grab a stiff brush. But if you are struggling with this, okay, if you are struggling with the dry times, I would just suggest to try a fluffy brush in the meantime until you can figure out how long it's taking to dry. So maybe you're wondering, Chelsea, why didn't you dip back into the glitter like you did with solids? Well, that is because if it is still tacky, that is going to cover up some of those big, beautiful glitter pieces. If there's any bit of tackiness left on there of the liquid, if you dip back in, it can possibly go right over top and cloud it. Notice the difference of this, okay? This swatch stick was done with a fast dry liquid. See how it's powdery and light looking? Look at how dark my middle finger one is with a medium dry time. That right there is the perfect example of how I know it is still wet. But I am going to let this air dry because I do not want to dip back in and cover any of those glitter pieces. So while this dries, I'm going to move on and show you an example for a design, aka ombre. I'm grabbing my slow dry liquid because if you struggle with getting that powder on your nail before it dries, a slow dry formula is great. And yes, look at this. You can mix and match liquids while you're doing your manicure. I do want to note that I believe you can also do this with a medium dry time if you're experienced and comfortable with it. So I've got my makeup brushes here, I've got my slow dry formula, and now we're going to do a thin even layer across the entire nail. I just want to stress again that this is just my opinion and anyone can use any liquids that they prefer or that they're comfortable with. So I just hope to shed some light on how you know if it's dry and at the end of the day, picking a liquid that works best for you. So notice that I'm not rushing, but I am moving quickly to make sure that I get it onto the nail before that base liquid dries, but not rushing by any means. While the liquid's still wet, I'm just going to gently press those glitter pieces down and rearrange them onto the nail. So this is why I stress so much, you guys, about application in liquid control, because that is how we know if the liquids are working properly. If you apply it too thick, it's possible that it won't cure properly on the nail. So when you apply the activator, if you notice it's always still gummy, I'm going to talk more about that once we get to that step, but that is why I stress so much about liquid control, because I want to make sure that the liquids are working right for you. This is why it's so difficult for me to say a hard answer or number or time on when that base liquid might be dry. So I hope this video further explains what it should look like when it's dry. And of course, after you've done each of your nails, if you touch it and it feels dry, then yes, it is okay to dust it off. Okay, now let's talk about clear dip powder. I don't know what it is about clear. I don't know if it's because it doesn't have any color pigment in it, but it just notoriously dries slower for me. Is that the same for y'all? Like, let me know. I would love to hear this. But my point is, just be careful with the clear. So I'm just gonna dip right in. Everything is the same. I'm using a slower drying formula to show you, but you can see I haven't re-dipped. You will notice after time when you move on to that next nail, you know, you're chugging along, you found your rhythm, you're dipping each of your nails. When you go back, look at how dark that is. This other swatch is the same amount of dips, it's got clear on it, but you can see it's got a shine, it's darker. That is how I know it is still wet, and I personally would just dip right back into clear. Even with all of these tips and showing you how it would look when it's dry versus wet or tacky, if you do find you're still struggling with the dry time, please reach out to that company. They are the experts on their products. So I would love for you to still get help if you need it. So don't be afraid to go to their website, look up the instructions, or just reach out to their customer service. Now let's talk about activator dry time. So it's so important, you guys. Did I mention it's so important that we apply a very generous layer of this, okay? Saturate the nail. If you find that it is still gummy after the fact, go back and do another layer. So I am going to let this dry for 2 minutes. For whatever reason, that is just my general rule of thumb. Now let's say, you know what, you applied it and you go, oh, Snapple, I did not check the time. I don't know how much time has lapsed. Let me show you how you know if it is properly dried. Each of your nails should make that clicking sound, not just the first nail, but all of them. That's how you know they're hardened and you can go ahead and file, shape, and buff. Now it's time for the second activator. So this is equally important to make sure you're waiting that 2 minutes. And of course, please just check on the specific brand's website on what they say for dry time. It could be 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, but I just go off of the brand specific. And if I don't know, I just stick with the 2 minutes. If you find that your top coat is getting contaminated, it could be because you're not waiting long enough for this activator step to dry. So check that clock before you move on to top coat. Now, mind you, you're gonna move on and do all of your nails with this step. I don't start the clock until I've hit that last nail. So that is when I start for 2 minutes. After 2 minutes have passed, I use a dry napkin or a dry paper towel to just rub it across the entire top surface. This just makes sure that there's no excess activator, but I don't wash my hands and I don't do any rubbing alcohol. Now with my top coat, this is going to vary so much, you guys, on what the brand suggests to do. This is a faster drying top coat. It's definitely one of my holy grails right now. These are the 3 of my top favorites right now for top coat, but each have a different dry time. So these 2 here are a little bit slower. I would say OPI's is medium, but the glossy coat, the last layer, is a slower dry time. I'm talking around 10 minutes for it to completely dry. For this example, I've grabbed the Sparkling Co. 1, so I'm going to do 3 quick strokes. I follow these same steps for every single top coat. I do 3 quick strokes for the first layer. That is it. Now, what happens next? How do you know when to go in for the second layer? That is going to vary on each brand. Sparkling Co. suggests after you've done each of your nails on both of your hands, you can go in and do the second layer immediately following. So you have to go in and see what that brand suggests on the dry time for the first coat. So I finished each of my nails. Now I'm going to go in for the second layer. The second layer is more precise, more detailed. Their website does suggest it takes around 10 minutes for this second layer to dry. So I'm going to show you what happens if you accidentally smudge it, or maybe it's just not properly drying for some sort of reason. It dries matte, or it dries gummy, or it just doesn't want to dry at all. Tragedy is struck. You accidentally just touched that super wet top coat. You see how it's all matte looking and wrinkled, and I totally just smudged it. So how do we fix this? Well, now we do really have to let this fully dry before we can fix it. So let that completely dry, and then we're going to grab a buffing block and we're going to buff off the top coat. You can also use the 180 grit side of a nail file as well. So remember to let that completely dry before you do this step, or you're going to have an even bigger gummy mess on your hands. Here's how it looks once I'm done. I'm going to dust that all off, and with my activator, aka Seal and Protect, we're going to apply a very generous layer of this across the entire nail. Then let that dry for 2 minutes. Once it's dry, we're going to use our dry napkin again and rub it across the entire top surface. Now with my fast dry top coat, I'm going to show you how you know when that first layer is dry. So I'm going to do 3 quick strokes on the nail and then let that dry. I want to show you, do you see this beautiful ring on my nail? It's even, it's smooth. Watch what happens now after 30 seconds. Do you see how it's a little bit wrinkly looking? That's how I know when the first layer is dry and I can go in for my second coat. The second coat's more precise, more detailed, and again, the second layer is going to dry much faster because that is what this brand does. It is a faster drying top coat. Phew, if you made it to the end, you're the real MVP, because I know that was such a mouthful, and I hope you know that I am not saying you can't use any one dry time no matter where you're at in your dip powder journey. It's whatever you're comfortable with. There's just so many variables to this question that there's not going to be one perfect answer. So whatever you like, I support it. And I hope that you found today's video helpful. Thank you guys so much again for your questions. It helps me so much with building my videos around them. And as always, we are a community, so feel free to comment down below and let others know what formula you like, what type of brands you like, and why. Thank you so much again for watching, and I hope you have an amazing day. I will see y'all next week.